They didn't even wait until the meeting was over. In front of 30 people, my new boss leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said the words that still sting in my chest. "You're no longer relevant here." Laughter broke out across the room, not because it was funny, but because everyone was too nervous to do anything else. Imagine standing there, frozen, while your years of work are erased with one careless sentence. That was me. 13 years of building the foundation of this company gone in an instant. My hands were shaking under the table, but I forced myself to stay still because if I moved, I might break. The worst part wasn't the insult, it was the silence that followed. Not a single voice spoke up. Colleagues I had trained, mentored, even protected during late-night outages all kept their heads down. I realized then, in the middle of that humiliating moment, how invisible I had become. I wanted to shout. I wanted to defend myself, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at him, smiled faintly, and thought, "You have no idea what you've just set in motion." Before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause for a second. Where are you listening from right now? And tell me honestly, have you ever been dismissed, ignored, or treated like you didn't matter, even though you were holding everything together behind the scenes? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might give strength to someone who feels exactly the way I did in that room. 13 years. That's how long I poured my life into this company. I wasn't just an employee clocking in and out. I was the one who built the backbone of everything they now take for granted. I still remember my first week when the office was nothing more than rented space with folding chairs and a shaky internet line. Back then, nobody believed we could compete with the giants, but I did. I stayed late, patched holes in our fragile system, and slowly turned a patchwork of code into a living, breathing infrastructure. I survived 5 different CEOs, each one convinced they had the magic formula. Some burned out, some cashed out, but through every transition, the systems I designed kept humming in the background. 6 CTOs came and went, too, all eager to leave their mark, and yet every time something failed, they came to me. "Clara, can you stabilize this? Clara, can you reroute traffic before the servers melt?" And I always did, quietly, without applause, without credit. There's a strange kind of pride in being invisible. When the lights stay on, when the dashboards stay green, no one thinks of the person behind it. But that invisibility is also a curse, because after a while, people start assuming you're just there, like plumbing, like air. Essential, but overlooked. I can't even count the nights I slept under my desk during outages, or the weekends I canceled plans to prevent a crash. My friends joked that the company was my second marriage. Maybe they were right. But unlike a real marriage, this one was one-sided. I gave everything, and in return, I got silence. Still, I kept telling myself it was worth it, that loyalty meant something, that one day someone would see the weight I carried. And yet, as I looked around that room after being called irrelevant, I realized maybe I had been lying to myself all along. Because loyalty only matters if it's returned. Ethan Ward didn't just walk into the company, he strutted. That's the only word for it. Every morning, his polished shoes clicked across the marble lobby like he was walking a runway, not heading into a boardroom. He had the kind of smile that belonged in glossy brochures, bright, calculated, but never reaching his eyes. People whispered about his charisma, about how he could sell water to a drowning man. And maybe he could, but charisma doesn't keep servers from crashing at 3 a.m. From the very beginning, I noticed how obsessed he was with appearances. The walls of our data center might as well have been invisible to him. What mattered was the walls of the conference room, covered with animated charts, shiny graphics, and buzzwords stacked on top of each other like empty Lego bricks. To Ethan, a system wasn't measured by its uptime or resilience, it was measured by how impressive it looked in a slide deck. One afternoon during a planning session, I brought up the need for another disaster recovery drill. Last quarter, we barely passed the stress test. If something bigger hits, we'll need redundancy in place, I explained. He waved me off with a chuckle. Clara, do you know how negative that sounds? We can't keep alarming people with these worst-case scenarios. Stakeholders want vision, not doomsday rehearsals. The room laughed politely. I didn't. Because I remembered the blackout last year when a single power hiccup nearly cost us millions. Vision doesn't fix broken circuits. The longer he stayed, the clearer it became. Ethan was a peacock feathers wide, colors bright, but useless when it came to actual flight. He wanted to dazzle investors, charm executives, and brush aside anyone who reminded him of the unglamorous reality holding everything together. And the more he ignored the foundations, the more fragile everything began to feel. I could sense the cracks forming. Small, almost invisible, but cracks have a way of spreading. And soon, one decision of his would push us closer to the edge than anyone expected. The first warning sign came quietly, like most disasters do. A minor power fluctuation on the east wing of our data center. Just a flicker, barely a blip on the monitoring dashboard. To me, though, it felt like the sound of glass cracking under pressure. I flagged it during the next leadership sync, outlining what it meant our backup systems weren't as stable as we thought, and if another surge hit, the consequences could spiral. Ethan leaned back in his chair, adjusted his cufflinks, and smiled that polished smile. Clara, we can't keep running fire drills for every little bump. Investors want efficiency, not endless redundancies. Do you know how much those backups cost us every quarter? I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice steady. They cost less than a total outage. He laughed softly as if I had just told a child's ghost story. Always so dramatic. Relax. Systems don't fail that easily. But I had seen them fail. I had lived through nights when one faulty update brought everything crashing down. I remembered the chaos, the panic calls, the dashboards bleeding red, and I remembered how close we had come to losing everything. Over the following weeks, more signs appeared. A certificate nearing expiration that no one but me noticed. A failed test in our deployment pipeline that Ethan brushed aside because it wasn't on the presentation agenda. Each small issue was like a loose thread dangling from a fabric stretched too thin. I tried pulling people aside, quietly warning them. Some nodded, some even agreed. But none dared challenge him in public. That was when I realized the seeds of collapse weren't just technical, they were cultural. Fear had taken root. People were more afraid of Ethan's disapproval than of the systems breaking apart. And as I watched him wave away my concerns again and again, a knot began to tighten in my stomach. I knew it was only a matter of time before those cracks spread wide enough for everyone to see. The only question was who would pay the price when it happened. The meeting was supposed to be a simple infrastructure review, a quick check-in, a chance to make sure leadership understood the state of the systems. At least that's what the agenda said. What it became was something else entirely. Ethan walked in 5 minutes late, carrying no notes, just that same self-satisfied grin. The conference room was full. HR sat at the corner, a few senior managers lined up across the table, and even junior engineers were pulled in to observe. I felt the shift in the air almost immediately. This wasn't going to be a review. It was going to be a show. He started casually enough, clicking through slides that looked more like a marketing pitch than a technical update. Colorful graphs, vague buzzwords, nothing concrete. Then, without warning, he turned the spotlight on me. "Clara," he said, his voice sweet but sharp, "we've noticed some rigidity in your approach. You keep insisting on costly backups, audits, drills. Tell me, is this about protecting the company or protecting your own position?" The words landed like a slap. A hush fell over the room. My mouth went dry. I opened my laptop, ready to pull up the data, the numbers that justified every recommendation. But before I could speak, he cut me off. "Let's be honest," he continued, eyes sweeping across the table. "Some people here are stuck in the past. They don't realize how fast the industry is moving. And frankly, the salaries we're paying for that kind of thinking, not sustainable. There it was, a knife wrapped in a smile. No one laughed this time, but no one spoke either. Some avoided my eyes, others stared down at their notepads. I sat still, heart pounding, my face carefully blank. Because if I reacted even for a second, I'd be giving him exactly what he wanted. That meeting wasn't about systems. It was about breaking me publicly so no one else would dare question him. But as I left the room in silence, one thought burned in my mind. If he wanted a spectacle, he hadn't seen anything yet. After that meeting, something inside me shifted. The sting of humiliation was still raw, but it wasn't going to paralyze me. If Ethan wanted to play games in the spotlight, I would move in the shadows, quietly, patiently, with precision. That night, while the office lights dimmed and most people had gone home, I stayed behind. I opened a new folder on my secure drive and labeled it with a single word, ARC. Not revenge, not sabotage, just insurance. A safeguard for myself and for the company, even if they didn't realize it yet. Every email Ethan sent dismissing my concerns, every Slack message where he waved off warnings, every presentation where he downplayed risks, I archived them all, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. I wasn't angry as I did it. I was methodical, almost calm, like an engineer assembling a failsafe that no one else knew existed. I went further. I updated the disaster recovery documents, embedding language that redirected authority under certain conditions. I made sure critical keys were placed in escrow with access tied to strict legal clauses. To anyone glancing at the paperwork, it looked routine, another boring compliance update. But I knew better. Buried in those updates was a lifeline, a way to protect the system if Ethan's recklessness finally pushed it too far. For weeks, I worked in silence. I smiled in meetings, nodded at his flashy slides, and never challenged him outright again. Let him think he had won. Because while he preened for executives, I was quietly building the evidence, the protocols, the structure that would matter when the lights finally went out. And the truth was, I didn't need to rush. Time was on my side. Systems always reveal the truth sooner or later. I closed my laptop one evening, staring at that folder name ARC. It felt heavy, like it carried more than files. It carried a promise that when the storm came, and I knew it would, I wouldn't be the one drowning. For weeks, I had been building my ARC in silence, but every safeguard needs a spark, something to bring it to life. Ethan gave me that spark himself. He just didn't know it. The second time he humiliated me in front of the leadership team, I noticed something most people missed. His words weren't just cruel. They crossed a line written into the company's own policies. Buried deep in my contract was a section that almost no one paid attention to, Clause 14C. It was legal language designed to protect senior technical staff from harassment or undue interference, especially when safety or compliance was involved. When Ethan turned the review into a mock trial, questioning my loyalty and mocking the salary I had earned, he didn't just bruise my pride. He handed me legal grounds. I remember sitting there, keeping my face perfectly still, while inside, a switch flipped. His public performance had triggered the very clause I had quietly woven into my ARC. That evening, I documented everything. The exact words he used, the silence in the room, the presence of HR as a witness. I didn't write it like a complaint. I wrote it like evidence. Clean, precise, undeniable. Then I sent a copy to legal, framed as a compliance update. Nothing emotional, nothing personal, just a factual note. Condition 14C has been met. Protocol changes attached. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair. My heart wasn't racing anymore. In fact, I felt strangely calm. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was discipline, order, proof that systems, whether technical or human, should follow the rules they're built on. From that moment on, everything was different. Ethan thought he had cornered me, but all he'd done was pull the trigger on a mechanism he couldn't see. The fuse was lit, and the countdown had already begun. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No drama, no raised voices, no flashing alarms. Just me alone at my desk watching lines of code scroll by. That's when I made the change. One small keystroke, a quiet adjustment buried deep in the system, so subtle that anyone else would have mistaken it for routine maintenance. I revoked a single heartbeat token, a signal the entire infrastructure relied on, even if most people didn't realize it. Without it, the system didn't fail immediately. It wasn't designed to collapse all at once. Instead, it began a slow countdown. A graceful unraveling that would take hours, maybe even days, before the absence became undeniable. To anyone looking, the job I committed looked harmless. I even named it something ordinary, policy_rotation.sh. A label so boring, it blended right into the noise of daily operations. I knew no one would question it. That was the beauty of it. The most powerful moves don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight. As I watched the change take effect, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was steady, focused. This wasn't sabotage. It was a release. I had stopped holding up the weight they had all taken for granted. If Ethan wanted to strip away every safeguard to mock the invisible hands keeping things afloat, then let him experience what happens when those hands step aside. I closed my laptop and stood up, slipping on my coat. Around me, the office buzzed with the usual chatter, people laughing at inside jokes, someone complaining about the coffee machine. No one knew a switch had been flipped. That was the point. I walked out into the city air, breathing deeper than I had in weeks, because from that moment on, the system was ticking on borrowed time, and soon everyone would hear the silence I had left behind. The morning after I pulled the silent switch, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Not because I had work to do, but because I needed closure. I had already drafted my resignation letter, simple and professional, with no bitterness between the lines. I printed it, signed it, and slipped it into an envelope addressed to HR. On my desk, I left one last note for whoever would eventually find it. A single yellow Post-it stuck neatly to my monitor. 4 words written in black ink. Restore key in escrow. No explanations, no dramatics. Just the truth. If they wanted stability, the path was already there. But it would cost them the humility to admit they needed it. I took a slow walk around the office, passing by desks I had known for years. The juniors hunched over their keyboards, still learning to swim in the deep end. The veterans sipping coffee, trading quiet jokes. None of them looked up as I passed, and for once, I didn't mind. They didn't need to. This was my goodbye, not theirs. When I finally reached the exit, I paused and glanced back at the rows of screens glowing in the half-light. I thought about the countless nights I had kept those systems alive, the unspoken hours I had given. There was no anger in me now, only a strange calm. I had carried the weight for 13 years, and today I was finally setting it down. I pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the noise of New York. The city roared, as if to remind me there was a bigger world beyond those walls. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the subway, the envelope still in my hand. Behind me, the countdown was already in motion, and ahead of me, freedom tasted closer than it ever had before. It started as a whisper, barely noticeable, a small error code buried in a dashboard most executives never even glanced at. Then another, and another. Within an hour, the whispers had grown into a chorus of red alerts. Services began timing out. Connections slowed. Customers started filing complaints. By mid-morning, the storm had arrived. Dashboards across the company glowed crimson, and the frantic clicking of keyboards echoed through the open floor. Engineers scrambled in the war room, voices overlapping panicked cues. Jammed again. Did we lose the cert rotation? Why are the backups offline? Every question led to silence. Because the answers weren't there. The safeguards Ethan had dismissed, the very ones I had carried for years, were gone, and now the system was collapsing under its own weight. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a quiet cafe near Central Park, sipping coffee as if it were just another day. My phone buzzed on the table, messages flooding in from old colleagues, Slack notifications, desperate pings, even calls I didn't answer. I simply watched the screen light up, one after another, until it looked like a beacon of chaos I no longer had to touch. I didn't feel glee watching it happen. What I felt was inevitability. This was the future I had warned them about, the disaster that was always waiting at the edge of carelessness. The only surprise was how quickly it all unraveled once I stepped aside. Back at headquarters, I could picture it clearly. Ethan pacing, his perfect smile gone, his voice no longer confident but sharp and frantic. Investors demanding answers. Executives realizing too late that glossy presentations can't keep servers alive. The meltdown wasn't loud in my world. For me, it was quiet, steady, like the sound of a heavy door closing. But inside that company, it was chaos. And soon, someone was going to ask the question Ethan least wanted to hear: where's Clara? By the time executives gathered in the war room, the company was on fire. Systems were down across multiple regions, customers were threatening to walk, and millions of dollars were bleeding out by the hour. The room, usually a polished stage for Ethan's flashy updates, had turned into a battlefield. Screens lit up with red arrow logs, voices clashed, sharp and panicked. Ethan stood at the center, tie loosened, sweat forming at his collar. Gone was the calm, charming leader. What remained was a man scrambling to control a storm he couldn't even understand. "Restart the load balancers," he barked. "We did. Nothing's moving," an engineer shot back. "Then roll back the pipeline. It's not deploying. Authentication's failing." Every command only revealed how little he grasped. The team wasn't listening anymore. They were surviving. Then the legal counsel entered the room carrying a folder. The tension shifted. She laid a document on the table, speaking firmly. "Clause 14C has been triggered. The keys to restoration are in escrow. Access requires board approval." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Ethan froze, blinking as if the words were in another language. "What does that even mean?" he demanded. "It means," the counsel said, "that the one person who held this system together warned us. We ignored her. And now the protocol has defaulted to her terms." The CEO leaned forward, his face tight with anger. "You told us backups weren't necessary. You cut the drills. You dismissed her concerns. And now the company is collapsing under your leadership." No one defended Ethan. Even the managers who had once laughed at his jokes avoided his eyes. The room had turned against him, not with shouts, but with silence, an unspoken verdict. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. I could picture the exact moment they realized the truth. Ethan wasn't the leader he pretended to be. He was the liability. And when the board moved to remove him, it wouldn't be with drama or fanfare. It would be clinical, swift, inevitable. Because in that war room, power had already shifted. When the dust finally settled, the company survived, but not without scars. The systems were restored, the clients were reassured, and the money slowly stopped bleeding. But the cost was written in everyone's faces. Ethan Ward was gone, quietly dismissed by the board, escorted out of the building with none of the fanfare he had craved. As for me, they tried to call me back. HR sent polite messages. The CEO even reached out personally, offering whatever terms I wanted. "Come rebuild this with us," they said. But I didn't return. I had given 13 years of my life, and that was enough. I wasn't interested in building lifeboats for people who had already laughed as they cut them loose. Instead, I chose to walk forward into something new, something that belonged to me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Looking back, I don't see the story as one of revenge. It was never about watching things fall apart. It was about discipline. Systems need it, people need it. Without it, even the brightest feathers and loudest voices can't hold anything together. Ethan thought ego could replace discipline. He was wrong. The truth is, discipline isn't glamorous. It doesn't get applause or headlines. Most of the time, no one even notices it. But discipline is what keeps the lights on. It's what turns chaos into order and fear into stability. And when it's ignored, the collapse is only a matter of time. So maybe that's the lesson here. Ego might dazzle for a moment, but it never lasts. Discipline does. Now I'll leave you with this. What about you? Have you ever been in a place where you gave everything only to be overlooked until it was too late? Share your story in the comments. You never know, your words might be the reminder someone else needs today.